So I want to give you a quick overview of some key terms in terms of how we're going to talk about going through a sugya. This is probably review for the most part, so it's just helpful review after the summer, but also because I have my own particular ways of talking about certain things, so it'll be helpful for you to sort of get a sense of that. So, the parts of a sugya. First of all, the term sugya is the general term for any single passage or unit of Gemara. That means that any discussion could be a couple of lines, or it could be an entire amud or more, as long as it's one continuous conversation centered around one topic. That'll be a sugya. So each separate piece will be this sugya. We'll go on to the next sugya. A sugya can have several parts, but it will generally be a single continuing conversation. Now, when we look at a sugya, we are looking to distinguish primarily sources from discussion. Like sources from discussion. And we look at the sources kind of independently, and we see how the discussion utilizes those sources. Now, when I say sources, I'm referring to two kinds of sources, and two kinds only. Braitot and Memrot. Okay. The Mishnayot that are quoted in the Gemara kind of also fall in with Braitot in that category, but mainly Braitot and Memrot. A Braitot is a teaching of the Tanaim, right? A Memra, a teaching of an Amora. But both of those are sources in that they are attributed with sort of introductory terms, and also they are generally terse, sort of carefully formulated and sort of edited, memorized statements, as opposed to more free-form discussion. Anything that's not part of a Braita or a Memra, we will refer to as discussion or Shaklavataria. Right? Try to use the term Shaklavataria, but either way, whether we refer to it as discussion, Shaklavataria, or the Gemara, it's all the same. Now, the key thing, therefore, the first thing we need to be working on is how do you identify the sources? Now, each type of source has typical words and phrases that introduce them. That makes that easy. For a Braita, we've seen Tanura Banan, we've seen Tanya, and other forms of Tana, Tanan for a Mishnah, etc. There are a few other terms. We will encounter a couple of them in the course of this year. For a Memra will generally start with Amar Rav so-and-so, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rav Yosef, etc. Obviously, absent a term, you could have Tanya Amar Rabbi Yehuda, and that would be a Braita, but without that, just Amar Rabbi Yochanan is a Memra, and therefore you also know that the rabbi quoted there is an Amora. You can also have, as we had, I think we saw at some point, Itmar, which is a form of Amar, and that's generally when there's more than one Amora quoted in a particular Memra. Now, the challenge of identifying where a source ends is generally more difficult. There isn't a clear signpost to say, source is over, now we'll talk about it. There are no end quotes. So how do you figure it out? Well, you can't always be sure, but there are some key things to look for. One, changing from Hebrew to Aramaic. If you see sources are almost always in Hebrew. If you suddenly have words that look Aramaic, you know, Toto, this isn't our source anymore. Two, one of the common things we'll see is a comment about the source, a question, a challenge, a clarification. Why did the source say such and such? What did it mean by da da da? Once you're doing that, you're no longer in the source. And the third sort of basic basic thing to look for is breaking a pattern. If a source is carefully formulated and terse, right, and has a very clear structure, then once you notice that structure is no longer has ended, you can guess that you've likely reached the end of your source. So, again, sources and discussion. The kinds of sources we're looking for are Brightot and Maimrot. Both Brightot and Maimrot have introductory phrases that help us to identify them. Right? They're not always there, but usually. And the bigger challenge will be identifying where a source ends. But identifying where a source ends will be very important, and recognizing this is what the source said, and then this is what the Gemara said about, or added to, or explained about the source. Differentiating between those two will be a crucial element of our task as readers. Okay.